morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIX. I'm Yeon-ho Kim, Associate Director of GWIX. Thank you for joining our Korea Policy Forum on the first Biden-Yoon Summit, Conventional and Economic Security. Today's forum is co-sponsored by the East Asia National Resource Center at GW and the U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University in South Korea. With that, let me turn it over to Jisoo Kim, Director of GWIX, for opening remarks. Jisoo.
Great. Thanks, Yeon-ho. Good morning and good evening for those of you joining us from Korea. I'm Jisoo Kim, Director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies. I would like to welcome all of you to our last Korea Policy Forum of this academic year. Today's event is, as Yeon-ho mentioned, co-sponsored by GWIX, East Asia NRC, and U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University in Korea. I would like to especially thank Director Hoong-gyu Kim for his support and co-sponsorship of today's event, and I hope we can continue our collaboration to generate critical discussions related to U.S.-Korea relations. And I would also like to thank our speakers for their participation today. This Saturday on May 21st, the first Biden-Yoon Summit will take place in Seoul. And after 2 years of the pandemic and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the new administration faces many challenges, both domestically and internationally. And North Korea continues to test missiles, but currently is suffering from the rapid rise of COVID cases, which is now becoming more and more serious. So in his first budget speech at the National Assembly on Monday, President Yoon Suk-yeol mentioned that the government is willing to provide COVID-19 aid to North Korea. And he also mentioned that he will be discussing the Indo-Pacific economic frameworks during the summit with Biden to strengthen cooperation in the global supply chain. There are many challenging issues on the table that will be discussed this weekend, and I'm curious to learn what experts think of this upcoming summit, and I look forward to hearing their insightful views. Thank you.
Thank you, Jisoo. Actually, Professor Hoong-gyu Kim, the director of U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University, was going to give opening remarks too, but he had technical issues and he cannot join us right now. Sorry about that. With that, let me start our roundtable discussion. We are lucky to have 4 distinguished speakers today who will tell us what they see in their crystal balls regarding the upcoming summit meeting. Let me introduce the Korean speakers first. Do-yeon Cha is a principal fellow of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. He also served as an adjunct professor at the University of North Korean Studies, a senior foreign affairs advisor to the governor of Gyeonggi Provincial Government, and the executive vice president of the Korea Foundation. Sunju Kang is a professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. She is an expert on rules-based international order, global governance, geoeconomics of Asian regionalism, and middle power diplomacy. Our next speaker is Greg Brzezinski, who is professor of history and international affairs at GW. He also serves as director of the Asian Studies Program and acting director of the Seeger Center at the GW Elliott School of International Affairs. Last but not least, Tammy Overby is president of Asia Pathfinders, where she advises clients on Asia and trade matters. She led the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Asia team, while also serving as president of the U.S. Korea Business Council. With that, let me turn it over to Greg.
Okay, thank you, Yeon-ho. Thank you. Pleasure to be here this morning. So I'm going to talk primarily about the U.S. side and what I expect to hear from President Biden in the upcoming Yoon-Biden summit. And in particular, I'm going to be talking more about traditional security. And so I think I would start off by saying I'm gonna talk first to give a broad overview, and then I'm going to talk about a few things that I'm pretty sure Biden will raise, and then I might talk about 1 or 2 issues that he probably won't raise, but that I wish he would. First of all, the overall focus, I think, is likely to be on finding ways to improve the U.S.-South Korean alliance And Biden is also going to ask Yoon if to consider other ways in which the United States and South Korea could cooperate. And from a conventional security perspective, some of these might include strengthening missile defense capabilities. This is obviously a pressing issue as usual, but especially now in light of these recent missile launches from North Korea. I think they may also discuss having more sophisticated strike capabilities. I think the U.S. Navy is going to be playing an expanded role in the Pacific in coming months, partially as a deterrent to China. And so I think in particular, they might discuss the use of South Korean naval bases and having a South Korean role in helping to beef up the U.S. naval presence in the region. And finally, I think they might discuss more military exercises from sort of a general perspective. And this would include military exercises that are not only U.S. ROK, but also that include members of the Quad. Now, what are some specific issues that I think Biden will want to bring up? First of all, obviously, Ukraine is something that's very front and center in everybody's mind right now. And even though it's not a regional issue, it's something that the United States has given a lot of attention to. And if you look at South Korean policy under Moon Jae-in, Seoul certainly didn't do anything to make the situation worse. But there were instances where the U.S. would have liked the South Korean government to give more robust support for the United States and NATO. For instance, initially, Moon Jae-in supported UN sanctions, but didn't necessarily go along with unilateral sanctions. So I think one of the things that the United States is going to ask, or that the Biden administration is going to ask South Korea for, is can the Yoon government agree to step up its criticisms of Russia as part of an effort? President Yoon has talked about these efforts to promote a principled foreign policy that's based on freedom. And so Biden is going, I believe, to ask Yoon to apply that to the situation in Ukraine. Obviously, North Korea is another issue that Biden is going to bring up. They're going to discuss the recent provocations, unquestionably. But I think it's clear that the two intend to discuss the issue and discuss cooperation on it. But looking into my crystal ball, as I was asked to do, I don't really see very much coming out of this summit in the way of new initiatives or solutions on the North Korea issue. I think 1 year from now, North Korea will still be conducting weapons tests and launching missiles, and the US and South Korea will be more unified in their approach, perhaps, but I don't think that there's going to be a realistic strategy that comes out of this summit that can noticeably change, that could noticeably change North Korea's behavior. So I'm mostly, I think U.S., Washington and Seoul will be able to talk about this, but I'm pessimistic that there's going to be a very successful change in U.S. policy. In terms, another issue that Biden will probably bring up is Japan. As people in the audience who know me know, I've been very critical of Japan, and I believe that it is Japan's failure to adequately acknowledge its past misdeeds that has resulted in much of the recent downturn in relations between Tokyo and Seoul. But at the same time, I still always believe that Japan and South Korea still share a number of common values that the majority of their neighbors in the Indo-Pacific do not. And I think the President Yoon has sort of announced that he wants his focus to be on these common values and interests, and has made some initial efforts to reach out to Tokyo. And Kishida has responded to this to some degree. And I think what Biden and Yoon are going to discuss is what the United States can do to help. The United States wants to play a facilitating role in this process. I do think that there may not be any real progress on this issue until after the elections in Japan in July. But nonetheless, this is an area where the United States is going to try to offer to play a productive role. Finally, of course, in terms of issues that the United States and the Biden administration is likely to raise is going to be China. And I think the Biden administration is likely to emphasize some things that South Korea knows and that Suk-yeol has also emphasized. One is that it's the United States that provides a clear security guarantee for South Korea, and that China is not always a good faith actor in the region. I expect Biden will applaud President Yoon for abandoning the so-called strategic ambiguity policy that had characterized diplomacy under Moon Jae-in, and he'll emphasize that China and Russia are moving closer together and that NATO and other American allies need to respond to this by strengthening their own alliance structures and cooperation. I think Biden may also want South Korea to become more a stronger public advocate of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. This was something that Moon Jae-in had actually taken a step toward doing and saying in previous statements. I think China has been making veiled threats against South Korea and about the possibility of enhanced cooperation between South Korea and the United States. I expect more veiled threats from China. I think, look at, if you ask me to look at my crystal ball, I could already see the vague threats coming from Chinese government social media accounts on Twitter. So expect more of that. But I think the United States will encourage South Korea to remain strong against these kinds of threats. Those are issues I think Biden would raise. One issue that I hope he will raise, but he may not, is gender issues in South Korea. And, a lot of people may think, well, that's not really traditional security or security policy. But I think, if you look at Yoon's cabinet, it's not very diverse. I think this is sort of an issue that the United States should stand for publicly. And I think it's not the kind of issue where Biden would want to publicly chastise Yoon, but I do think it's the kind of issue where the United States should encourage South Korea, because I do think these issues, gender equality, family leave, low birth rate in South Korea, those are also genuine security threats to South Korea. I don't know, I haven't seen any indication that Biden plans to bring this up. I know during the 80s, very subtle pressures on South Korea on human rights and democracy were somewhat successful. And I'm not comparing Yoon to the military governments of the 80s by any measure, but I think that kind of subtle encouragement is something that could be useful. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Greg, for your excellent preview of the upcoming summit meeting. Let me ask Do-hyun to share his view on the upcoming summit, a view from Korea.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kim. First of all, I would like my deep appreciation to the GW Institute for Korean Studies for giving me this good opportunity. While it may be more clear in the upcoming summit and the joint statement, I made the prospect of foreign and security policy of the Yoon administration based on 110 national agendas established by the Transition Committee for President Yoon Suk-yeol and comments and debate during the presidential campaign. Since the election campaign, South Korea's Yoon Suk-yeol administration has expressed a foreign and security policy direction that is different from Moon Jae-in administration, with denuclearizing first North Korea policy, policy toward neighboring countries focus on Korea-United alliance, and expansion of South Korea's status and role in the global level. On May 3, the 20th Presidential Transition Committee of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration announced the 110 national agendas of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, with 18 tasks set under the global people state contributing to freedom, peace, and prosperity. I agree on the point that, as Professor Brzezinski also mentioned, first of all, the focus of Yoon Suk-yeol administration's North Korea policy can be summarized as denuclearizing North Korea and the normalization of inter-Korean relations, which is quite different from the Moon Jae-in administration's national agenda, which emphasized exchanges cooperation between the two Koreas. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration emphasis on normalizing inter-Korean relations and denuclearizing North Korea can be evaluated as based on the perception that the former administration, especially under the Moon Jae-in administration, pursue a policy that ultimately gave initiative to Pyongyang by focusing only on improving inter-Korean relations. In other words, Moon Jae-in administration was passive in policies that could provoke North Korea in wishful thinking of North Korea's good faith or strategic determination. And this could be evaluated as an abnormal inter-Korean relationship. This perception is also evident in the fact that the President Yoon and his staff showed a negative position on lifting sanctions against North Korea without a major change in Pyongyang's attitude on denuclearization. North Korea's ballistic missile launch, which has been responded at the level of expressing regret or concern about during Moon Jae-in administration, will be called as a provocation again. And I think it is partially reflected at the joint statement of the upcoming summit. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration, however, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration will not exclude humanitarian aid to North Korea, regardless of provocations. And this is also evident in the position of the health and medical supply policies to North Korea after Pyongyang's recent announcement of the spread of Omicron virus within North Korea. In addition, in the case of humanitarian aid to North Korea, current South Korean government, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, takes the stance that it will only be implemented at the express request of the North Korea, which means that it will not pursue unilateral aid to the North Korea. And it is valid that the Yoon Suk-yeol administration also putting considerable emphasis on Korea-United alliance. As for national agendas, announced tasks directly related to the alliance is strengthening the Korea-United alliance and expanding the cooperation in defense, science, and technology. Above all, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration is expected to further contribute to the solidarity of the United ROK alliance by solving many problems that appeared in the Moon Jae-in administration in relation to the alliance, including threat perception, problem of threat perception, and problem of expansion of shared interest, including the expanded law via the Korean Peninsula, especially in the multilateral security cooperation in Indo-Pacific area, and mutual trust. Furthermore, the Yoon administration is expected to resolve pending issues that have been the subject of potential differences between the United States and South Korea. While it is not officially expressed in the joint statement, the promotion of the declaration of the end of the Korean War, which caused the difference of opinion between the United States and South Korea from the second half of the 2021, is expected to be naturally resolved or withdrawn. Concerning the upcoming transfer, the Security Consultative Meeting Agreement in 2021 will maintain its condition-based transfer stance and will not promote excessively early transfer. It is also expected that THAAD, which was in temporary deployment at the environmental impact assessment, has not yet been completed, even after deployment began in 2017. Yes, will be officially deployed early, and it could, included in the joint statement at this time. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration also offers a variety of visions through national agendas, such as strengthening cooperation in emerging security and increasing interest in international and regional issues. In the end, this can be seen as an expression of willingness to pursue more active diplomacy away from the Moon Jae-in administration, which was excessively immersed in North Korean issues, such as peace on the Korean Peninsula and the Korean reconciliation. In summary, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's foreign policy and security policies will be more conservative and more alliance-oriented than the Moon administration, which are also in line with the ideology of the ruling party, Korea's ruling party, People's Power Party. However, in my view, regardless of the problem is shared or expressed in the joint statement or not, the Yoon administration should overcome the following major challenges in security and foreign policy. First of all, Korea and the United States president should consider the problem of how, although it has taken a policy of inter-Korean cooperation first, denuclearization later, even the Moon Jae-in administration has also pursued denuclearization as its main goal. While it is criticized for dealing with North Korea under wishful thinking, it is hard to say that the Moon Jae-in administration has completely excluded the goal of denuclearizing North Korea. The dilemma of the Moon administration was that it has not found a clear way to break North Korea's nuclear obsession and to induce change of Pyongyang. A case in point in this point is that North Korea showed no interest in the Moon administration's economic cooperation incentives as well as humanitarian aid. This dilemma can be repeated in Yoon administration. Also, the same is true of dealing with China. Although the Yoon Suk-yeol administration is advocating mutual respect in the Korea-China relations and may express more active cooperation in the free navigation in the South China Sea or the peace in the Taiwan Strait. The issue of how to deal with China will face off with subtle economic retaliation will also be an important issue even in the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Second, we also keep in mind the adjustment of expectations for each other between Korea and the United States. Clearly, the Biden administration will want Seoul to take a leading role in managing Pyongyang's behavior on the Korean Peninsula for the time being, due to the Ukraine crisis and other external other issues in external policy. This might be contrary to the wishes of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, which wanted the United States to strengthen its security commitments to the Korean Peninsula. In particular, how to increase the credibility of the United States commitment to extended deterrence against North Korea's nuclear threat is a common task between the two countries. Though excessive expectation from both sides may also be involved in the expansion of Korea's international and regional contribution. Yes, a case in point in such issues as Korea's arms or equipment support to Ukraine. Biden administration may want that, but it's not so easy to implement in current state. Finally, We also keep in mind the domestic political trend. The Yoon administration is a minority party when it comes to the parliamentary seats in current status. Of course, while the overall political trend is in favor of a ruling party, it should be noted that these domestic political constraints may lead to excessive political strife on major issues in the field of foreign affairs security. Thank you.
Thank you, Do-hyun. Thank you for explaining the Yoon government's view on the conventional security issues. Let me move on to economic security issues, which have been very much emphasized and explained, I should say, by the Yoon governments, especially the president himself. So let me ask Sunju to start sharing her views.
It is truly unprecedented that a South Korean president holds a summit with the United States president only 10 days after taking office. The upcoming Biden-Yoon summit simply indicates the mutual significance and urgency that the two countries have with each other. Summits between South Korea and the United States have usually addressed two agendas, security and economy, and their economic agenda have been mostly related to trade. The upcoming Biden-Yoon summit will for sure include economy issues, but this time they will be of a different nature. The Biden-Yoon summit will discuss economic issues from the angle of security. In other words, President Biden and President Yoon will address mutual economic security. I think there are compelling reasons for South Korea and the United States to take on economic issues, not from purely economic viewpoints, but rather from strategic ones. First, President Yoon views that his predecessor, President Moon's foreign policy veered off too much into North Korea and China and failed to promote South Korea's interest in a global context. President Yoon is inclined to protect South Korea's interest based on the values of freedom, democracy, and peace, while consolidating a comprehensive alliance with the United States. President Yoon sees that stronger partnership and cooperation with the United States will add multiple layers of protection for South Korea's globalized economy and status in the world. On the other hand, President Biden has made Indo-Pacific the principal focus of United States foreign policy. This is largely driven by geopolitics and competition with China in particular. The Biden administration has been working with the allies and partners to modernize defense capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. And this compels the United States to think about economic issues such as resilience and supply chains from national security perspectives. The Biden administration seeks to reduce threats to national security, particularly coming from China, by building with reliable partners secure supply chains for products and raw materials essential for national security. With that purpose in mind, the Biden administration has recently proposed the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework includes 4 pillars like supply chain resilience, infrastructure and clean energy, tax and anti-corruption, and fair and resilient trade. Each pillar of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is broken down into smaller elements such as digital and emerging technologies, labor, agriculture, trade facilitation, and transparency and competition. As for now, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework does not appear to develop into a full-fledged free trade agreement for the region. From the point of view, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not likely to interest or help all the countries in the region. Instead, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will advance cooperation with allies and partner countries, particularly on critical and strategic sectors and technologies. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is likely to provide foundations for unilateral agreements between the United States and selective advanced economies in the region. Those advanced economies include potentially Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, and South Korea, to name a few, who have similar economic interests and security concerns over the Indo-Pacific region. South Korea has already expressed its interest in joining the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. There are particularly two areas that South Korea and the United States can achieve a higher partnership and cooperation within the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. They are supply chains and digital economy. Supply chains for semiconductors and batteries and digital economy are not only complementary to each other, but also consistent with the geostrategic objectives that the United States and South Korea share for the Indo-Pacific. There are synergistic benefits that the two countries can harvest from deeper cooperation in those fields. One caveat, though, to the upcoming Biden-Yoon summit is that the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is still at the stage of development and needs a lot of clarity on what it is trying to accomplish, in what form, and what country will be eligible to participate. As the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework takes shape further and more countries come to join it, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will serve South Korea and the United States economic and security interests better. This is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunju. Tammy, you have the last word on the economic security.
Thank you, Yeonho. And thank you to GWIX for this very timely discussion on this very important bilateral relationship at a critical juncture in time. President Yoon inherited a struggling economy, even forgetting about COVID. Pre-COVID, the Moon's administration focused on economic democratization, which resulted in increasing minimum wage and reducing work hours. We also saw a significant increase in regulations. So from the business community, the Moon administration was viewed, frankly, as unfriendly to business. Now we have a new administration. President Yoon has promised deregulation and a better business environment, along with closer ties with the United States, which are welcomed by the business community. President Biden, 16 months in, he also inherited an unpopular America, a struggling economy. We had, under President Trump, America First, which frankly was not very popular among our friends and allies. We saw a dramatic increase in tariffs. He started with steel and aluminum tariffs, which were supposed to be based on national security. And instead, from my perspective, he punched our friends and allies. He applied these tariffs to Korea, to Japan, to Canada, to Mexico, to the EU, and others. Then he moved on to China tariffs under Section 301. Almost all imports and exports from China are under these tariffs. Mistakenly, President Trump kept saying the Chinese are paying these tariffs. I encourage all your listeners to understand that tariffs are simply taxes, and either the company that is importing these products or the consumers who are buying those products are the ones paying those taxes. So President Biden has focused his first 16 months on trying to stabilize the domestic economy. He said he will not pursue free trade agreements for now. And as Professor Kong so eloquently discussed, they've introduced something called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I completely agree with her that we don't really know what this is yet. The parameters of it are not yet clear. We're hopeful that this very important trip, and again, I want to highlight that President Biden's first stop on his first Asian trip is Seoul, South Korea. This is indicative of how important the Biden team views this important relationship. But we're hopeful that on this trip to Seoul and then on to Tokyo, where he will also meet with the Quad, with the other three countries there, that there will be more clarity and some announcements about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that will give us a better understanding. What we do know, though, is it does not include market access or market opening requirements. So there's nothing about tariffs in there. There's nothing about increasing American exports. We also don't see any binding enforcement mechanisms. So from the business community, this looks a lot more like a political agreement than a real trade agreement. But again, we need more details, and hopefully those are forthcoming. I think it's still very important, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, because it shows America's back. We are re-engaging with the world. There are two large regional multilateral trade agreements, the CPTPP, the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the U.S. is not a member of, and RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the U.S. is also not a member of. So these two important regional agreements where rules of trade are being written, America is absent. We are not at the table. Korea is active in RCEP, and the Moon administration expressed a desire and intent to join CPTPP. I hope that the Yoon administration is able to move forward with that. That agreement will strengthen with Korea in it. I know there's some concern from my Korean friends that Japan will be difficult about Korea's entry. And that may be, but I think the Japanese realize that it will be a better agreement with South Korea in it. President Biden just hosted 8 of the 10 ASEAN leaders in Washington last week, continuing the focus on the importance of Asia. And again, this very timely summit between our two presidents on Saturday. They will talk about economic security, supply chain resilience, and emerging technologies. There will be areas for cooperation. I think we're going to see in nuclear. President Moon, it was ironic that he would travel around the world selling Korea's excellent capacity to build nuclear power plants while not using nuclear at home. I think President Yoon has indicated he's going to reverse that, and we've already seen an MOU between a major American nuclear technology company, NuScale Power, signed an MOU with 4 chaebols a couple of weeks ago. We're going to see areas for cooperation in semiconductors, in electric vehicles, in batteries, solar, 5 and 6G, and ORAN standards. So there's a lot of room for us to work together. In addition to the presidential summit on Saturday, we're also going to see a business roundtable that will be hosted by U.S. Department of Commerce Secretary Raimondo. We understand that Samsung, SK, Hyundai, LG, and possibly even Lotte, Hanwha, and OCI will be attending, along with the heads of the 4 major Korean business groups. I want to point out that the U.S. only has 3 free trade agreements in Asia, Singapore, Australia, and Chorus. And the U.S. Korea Free Trade Agreement, the KORUS agreement, is one of the highest standard trade agreements the U.S. has. So when I talk to American business about where to look, where to invest in Asia, Korea is always at the top of the list. The reason for that, this high standard agreement has strong legal protections. Korea follows rule of law. You have a highly educated workforce. It's a great place to test market new quality products. I also think that, unfortunately, Americans are not, they don't really appreciate trade agreements. They see them more as team in midterm elections this November, but consider perhaps renaming free trade agreements. What these really are trusted supply chain agreements. These are agreements with our allies, our friends, our partners, and it will help us ensure our economic security. But I do want to flag one thing before I close, and that is that I agree with Professor Kong that a digital agreement between the US and Korea is a very attractive possibility. But Korea's National Assembly has put forth a couple of bills that, if passed, will make it very difficult for US industry to support a Korea-US digital agreement. I think in Korea you refer to it as the Netflix law. But it's basically a network usage fee where companies would be double whacked on paying for the ISPs. It's a great thing for 3 Korea telcos who are internet service providers, but for content providers, both domestic and foreign, it'll be very problematic. It again, and it's scary to me because it looks again like Korea going backwards and looking for Korea unique regulations rather than following best practices around the world, trying to legislate something that would make Korea the only country in the world who does it, and not in a positive way. This would not help attract foreign investment. I look forward to our discussion, and with that, let me turn it back to our friends at GWIX.
Now let me open it up for a roundtable discussion, and let me throw one quick question about the conventional security to the speakers. I think Doo-yeon already tried to answer a question on this, but I think Ukraine is one of the most important topics that the 2 presidents will be discussing. So when it comes to the crisis in Ukraine and more cooperation between the 2 allies on this specific issue, how far do you think South Korea will be willing to cooperate with the United States? Biden must have his own laundry list when he meets with President Yoon on Ukraine. So, Doo-yeon, do you want to go first on this?
As you already know, Yoon administration expressed some of the sympathy of the Ukraine crisis and want to some of the indirect aid and support. For example, economic support for the Ukraine government. But as for the direct military aid or support, including this providing some of the military equipment or the weapon system. First, there was some of the limitation in the domestic legal problem. Yep. We also think about we provide our weapon system to the United States, and the United States give them to the Ukraine government. But in that case, yes, we have already the legal system for the logistic cooperation between Republic of Korea and the United States. But in that case, the Korean Army and the United Forces operate in the same territory. Yes, there is we need some of the revision of the logistic cooperation agreement between the ROK and the United States. And second is political problems. Some of the political factions within Korea, when frankly speaking, so hesitate, and some are passive toward the accumulated weapon system aid to Ukraine government. Third, we also worry about indirect retaliation from Russian Federation. Yes, some of the North Korean experts worry about the scenario that Russian Federation would support North Korea in developing some of the weapons of mass destruction, including the hypersonic ballistic missile, or the multiple independently target reentry vehicle technology to North Korea in response to our military aid to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dooyeon. Greg, do you have any comments coming from the US?
I would just add, from the U.S. side, what do I expect? I absolutely agree with much of what Professor Cha said. I have seen some people in U.S. think tanks and in other contexts have actually advocated that the South Korean government should provide artillery and other kinds of munitions to Ukraine, and have called for South Korea to become involved in that, and have said, well, the Ukraine recently gave a list of countries that it was thankful for providing weapons in the struggle against Russia. And South Korea wasn't on that, and it should be on it. So I've seen some people in the U.S. think tanks argue that, but I agree with Professor Cha's point as well, that some of this might actually be problematic within South Korea and very difficult for South Korea to do. I do think that, so the question, I think you raised a very interesting question, Yeonho, which is how far will Yoon actually go? And I think humanitarian assistance, South Korea will absolutely provide. Public support and more clear and forthright denunciation of Putin and Russian intervention, I think we can expect to see that as well. Whether we can actually expect military aid, that's really the key unknown at this point. And I think there's going to be some people in the United States that are advocating for this. I honestly don't know how hard Biden is going to push this, but I do think that's really the key unknown at this point.
Thank you. Sunju?
The economic issues to be resolved through Biden-Yoon summit later this week. I think President those issues that Mrs. Overby raised are significant enough for the United States to discuss or try to discuss at the summit during the summit. But I think as for now, the Korean side is not really ready to tackle those issues, and then there are a couple of reasons for that. As I said, this summit is taking place in a remarkably early stage of the Yoon's presidency, and then President Yoon is facing opposition. He is from the minority party, and then even before he takes office, he saw what kind of opposition he is going to get if he raise the difficult policy changes, like whatever the issues, whatever the policy area will be. So and knowing all these, knowing he's in a political environment, he wouldn't be brave enough to take those issues for in the first summit with the President Biden, I guess. But at this summit, President Yoon is likely to focus more on much more broader issues like the Indo-Pacific economic framework and other the related upgrading U.S. China, U.S. Korea free trade agreement, something like that. But I don't think he will go to this such. It is not minor issues, but his administration is not ready to tackle those. Is not ready to tackle. So probably he will keep those issues aside, and then keep present Biden's interest or attention to attention much bigger issues. And then between the United States and the South Korea, if President Yoon if President Yoon goes along with President Biden on those the very technical issues, policy issues like Netflix law, probably President Yoon will raise issues with the tariff on the Trump import the tariff on the steel and iron imposed by President Trump, and I think that is one of the issues that make South Korea and the United States go further on other bigger economy issues in the Pacific. So probably it will be wise of the United States to wait until 2024, I guess, to raise those issues, so we can handle those issues at Korean National Assembly, especially I think it is 2024. Korea will go for general election, and if a President Yoon's party holds a majority, it will be much easier for go through the law change, and so the whatever the regulations the United States hope to change, then United States will have a better chance to get its hopes and expectations to be met, I guess. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you have any issue to discuss furthermore, just let me know. Otherwise, I will keep throwing questions to you.
Yeah.
And Hung-gyu Kim, director of U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University, is joining us now. He had some technical issue and he was not able to join on time, but now we have him. So let me ask this question so that Hung-gyu can also join our discussion. So China should be another big topic to be discussed by the two presidents, and I think many Koreans are asking these questions. Can the two countries, U.S. and South Korea, come up with countermeasures against any possible Chinese retaliations against Korea when the Yoon Suk-yeol government takes some more some policies leaning toward more to the alliance rather than paying attention to the strategic partnership with China. So, do we have any idea of countermeasures? Do we have any discussions, at least in the United States, about that? That's my big question for the speakers. And Eun-gyu, if you want to start, just let me know.
I'm sorry for being late, and then I have 3 points about Wang Qishan, the Vice President of China, the visit to South Korea. He delivered the Chinese hope to be friends with South Korea. These days, Chinese are really working hard to show us their kindness. And then he exactly delivered what they hoped. And then the second point is he also showed us a kind of warning. Whenever we have any sensitive issues we deal with, they hope we care for the Chinese national interest. So be cautious in making any decisions related to the Chinese national interest. This is the second point. Third one is he also suggests to us, why don't we promote trilateral cooperation, including the FTAs and then also summit meetings. And one thing very interesting is the trilateral cooperation plus X. Plus X means, I think this means ASEAN. So it's gonna establish a kind of a sphere of influence guided by China. So this is a new suggestion to South Korea and then also new idea. So they are gonna establish a kind of a regional the value chains under the guidance of China. This is a new suggestions. But of course, the Yoon Suk-yeol government pays special attention to the U.S. ROK alliance, and then also the value focused the foreign policy and security orientations is very strong, and so we anticipate certain reaction countermeasures coming from China in the future. But frankly speaking, we do not have any other preparation or any other alternatives to counter Chinese reaction. So this is very sensitive issues to speak out at this moment, and then because we haven't yet started any new change of our foreign and security policies, just guessworks. But what we assumed is maybe there is a rocky road for us in the future. So when we experience the sad issues, there is no help from the United States and the other countries. So that's why we are very sensitive in dealing with these issues. But anyway, we have to think about what kind of measures China would take. At this point, China is really cautious in showing what they are going to have countermeasures, but they're also preparing for. This is quite natural. So it's very reasonable for the Yoon Kim mention these issues. And then, but as far as I understand, the Yoon Suk-yeol's government still hasn't yet have any preparation or any answer to these challenges.
Thank you, Eun-gyu. And I think Tuyeon has something to.
Yes. Although the Yoon administration do not clearly express its intention to stand on the United States side in relation with the U.S.-China strategic competition, the overall trend is that, yes, Yoon administration will be more likely to support the United States side than the Moon administration. The Yoon administration emphasizes several concepts such as the freedom and the human rights that are sharing values with the United States, and the South Korea's strategic clarity can be enhanced in the issues including South Korea's South China Sea, as I already mentioned, Taiwan threat in the future, but not in the short term, but more active cooperation with the United States in the stable Indo-Pacific area. Some of the developed expression may be included in this joint statement of upcoming summit. And we also have some of the defense issues related to China's existing position, such as the official deployment of SAD, and how we interpret three no demand from China regarding the counter WMD capabilities against North Korea. First, is no additional deployment of THAAD. Second, no participation in the United Missile Defense Network. Third, no trilateral security cooperation or trilateral alliance among United States, Japan, Korea. Yes, in the first and third one, yep, is the problem of future. But for enhancing combined capability, responding the North Korean threat, especially ballistic missile threat, it is inevitable in current state to expand and enhance our cooperation with the United States in missile defense system. Yes, it may provoke some of the retaliation from China. Yeah, the Yoon administration tried to, first of all, consult with China in our major change in the China policy. But frankly speaking, I also agree on the point that our government not fully prepared for the Chinese reform. But one thing is clear: Yoon Suk-yeol administration advocate development of Korea-China relations based on mutual respect in its relation with China, which in itself reflects the perception that Korea's position has not been properly respected in the existing Korea-China relationship. It's also the main task of the China to solve, to the China side to solve. It's not the unilateral. It cannot be resolved from the unilateral efforts. So to speak, the effort to accept the request of China is not so helpful to the future further development of Korea-China relationship. Look, this year it is 30th anniversary of the Korea-China diplomatic normalization, but there is no visible celebration of how is the current status of the Korea-China relations. Thank you.
Thank
May
you.
I add some comments more? May I? Yoon Suk-yeol government pays special attention to this certain, vocabularies like mutual respect between South Korea and China. And but the problem is your interpretation of mutual respect are quite different from each countries. China pays special attention to their own core national interests, such as Taiwan and then Tibet and then Hong Kong issues, something like that. They are strongly asking us to, pay respect to their own, interests. But South Korea's point of view, our, special interests, the core national interests relate to the North Korea, especially North Korea denuclearization. So what we ask each other are quite different. So even though we use the same vocabulary like mutual respect, but they are quite different. So and also the Yoon Suk-yeol government in exchange of summit meetings, Chinese President Xi Jinping invite Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol come to the Beijing first, and but South Koreans' request is the Xi Jinping, you have to come first, because we've already paid the visit twice in Moon administration. So this is your turn. So this is something different from the anticipate the rocky road in the relationship between these two countries. And but the problem is there are 1,800 items which we import 80% of our whole imports from China. So we are really vulnerable to the from the Chinese threat or use of this kind of the advantages to put the pressure upon South Korea. But frankly speaking, we do not have, as I mentioned, do not have any alternatives and just to face this kind of challenges. So that's why our communication and cooperation are very very important. And then also we anticipate very highly the President Biden's visit to South Korea, and so South Koreans, many South Koreans, they carefully watch over the what Biden wants and what Biden can do for us, and what we can cooperate each other when we have a summit meeting. This is very critical. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hung-gil. Let me ask our American speakers to chip in. Greg already raised his hand.
Yeah, so I would bring up a couple of points. First, I think you asked if China retaliates, can South Korea counter-retaliate? And I think that's sort of an interesting way of phrasing it. First, in terms of Chinese retaliation, what are they likely to do? Number one is, of course, economic measures. We've seen this in the past. China will try to punish South Korea economically. Number two, and less effectively, China will use public information information policy to try to attack South Korea. We see this with, China spreading misinformation a lot of times on social media in the United States. A lot of those efforts are pretty clumsy. But I do think South Korea should not underestimate its leverage with China. It's true that China, it probably accounts for a greater preponderance of South Korea's trade than South Korea accounts for China. But first of all, South Korean investment is still important for China. And so that's one method that South Korea has of counter-retaliating. Second, I think China needs a good relationship with South Korea to the greatest extent possible. It doesn't have good relationships from a security perspective with almost any other neighboring country. Its relations with India are bad. Its relations with Japan are bad. Its relations with Vietnam are bad. So it doesn't have a lot of good, stable relationships with its neighbors in the Pacific. And it really isn't in a great position to alienate South Korea. I think if China does that, it will risk further isolating itself. So I think Yoon might be onto something in recognizing that South Korea can push back on China a little bit now, because China has, in my view, weakened its own international position quite a bit by isolating itself by so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, where you have people speaking in a very nationalistic way, but this makes other countries in the region feel more threatened by China. And the result of that is, as I've said, that China becomes more isolated. So if I were to sort of, give any advice to the South Korean government right now, I think it would be don't underestimate South Korea's leverage over China and China's need for a strong relationship with South Korea.
Thank you, Greg. Tammy?
Sure. I would also like to point out the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The way that's often characterized in the US by President Biden is democracies versus autocracies. So I do think that and that I think is going to be one of the highest things on President Biden's agenda in his discussion, both with President Yoon, but also with Prime Minister Kishida. And I saw in the question, somebody was asking about, could Taiwan join the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? There are many members of bipartisan members of Congress who are suggesting that, and who are also suggesting perhaps a free trade agreement with Taiwan. Again, I don't think we're going to see any FTA with the Biden team until after the midterms, but I do think we're going to see more attention given to Taiwan. And to clarify what I said about Japan supporting or not supporting Korea in CPTPP, I think ultimately Japan will support South Korea because Japan recognizing that that this agreement would be much stronger with South Korea in it. Ultimately, when the U.S. was an active participant in TPP, one of the reasons was to give an alternative to China. And I don't mean encircle and to force countries to choose, but to give China an opportunity to join a comprehensive high standard agreement with clear rules. When I was at the chamber leading the U.S. business delegation to all these negotiations, my first trip when I got back to DC was always to the Chinese embassy to explain to them what happened, what the U.S. is looking for. Ultimately, the U.S. wants an active economic arrangement in Asia with China as part of it. It's such a significant economy to everyone. But we want China to follow the rules, the same rules everyone else follows. And my Chinese friends would always say, oh, we're very interested, but can you lower the standards a little bit? To which my response was always, if Vietnam can meet these high standards, I'm sure a great country like China can. And please note that when a country joins a large agreement like that, everyone doesn't have to do everything immediately upon joining. That's all a negotiation when you're going to accede to certain things. So, and to my American friends who think that China's interest in CPTPP is just a smokescreen, they're completely wrong. The Chinese are taking this very seriously. They've completely translated all of the texts. They've done very detailed gap analysis of what they would need to do. China, and that's a responsible thing for them to do. Frankly, it would also be responsible for the US to go back. I'll stop and get off my soapbox, sorry.
Thank you, Tammy. Let me open it up for Q&A now. We have around 10 minutes left, but I think we already covered some questions the attendees posted. And I think one question that we haven't touched upon is the COVID situation in North Korea. The question is from Jonathan Chiarella. And regarding this issue, the question is, will Yoon and Biden prepare for a desperate Pyongyang to lash out with more missile tests in order to get attention? Or will Yoon and Biden consider dealing with a humanitarian crisis? Or will the crisis, quote unquote, the crisis subside because COVID has already evolved into being more contagious but less deadly? I noticed that Duyon already tried to answer the question, but I think we can discuss furthermore on this very important topic.
As I already said, yes, the official position of Yoon Suk-yeol administration is that South Korea can provide some of the vaccines and the medicine for preventing the spread of the Omicron within North Korea, regardless of North Korean provocation. But yes, as I know, yesterday our Ministry of Unification delivered the message in North-South communication line, but there's still no answer from Pyongyang. Yes, clearly, during the upcoming summit, President Biden and President Yoon will discuss about joint response of the United States and Korea on the Omicron issues within North Korea. In the case of North Korea refuse or deliver no answers about our suggestion to support. There was no way to unilaterally to provide humanitarian aid. In that case, yes, we could find a way to medicine and patient support through the international organizations such as the WHO or COVAX facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg?
I would say two things. One is that I think, the South Korean government actually has, from what I've seen, made it pretty clear that it's willing to aid North Korea. And there's always the question of what aid will North Korea want or accept. The one thing I would say, though, is that it's quite questionable that Omicron is less severe than other strains of the virus. I've seen a lot of things by epidemiologists that have said, yes, it's killed fewer people, but that's because more people have been vaccinated. So if you take away the vaccines, Omicron isn't necessarily less inherently severe than other strains of the virus. And so I think that's one of the things that from an epidemiological standpoint can make its spread in North Korea so potentially dangerous, that North Korea doesn't have the infrastructure to cope with this, number one. And number two, that there's such a few, if any, people there have been vaccinated. So I think I think it can be quite a dangerous situation if those epidemiologists who say that Omicron is in fact not less severe than other strains of the virus turn out to be correct, and they have more expertise on it than me, so I'll trust what they say.
Oh,
Yes,
I
David?
would like to ask just one point additionally. Yes, we also think about why North Korea revealed the fact of the spread of Omicron in this stage. Not last year, there were so many suspicions about. There were so many confirmed cases already in North Korea. Why now? Yeah, we may expect two scenarios. One is, the situation within North Korea is not so serious. That be called with a contingency. But North Korea has its own preparation for returning to the dialogue and accepting the international aid from WHO, not aid from South Korea. And in the long run, North Korea accumulate some of the causes and some of its own reputation to reviving the dialogue with the United States. The second is, North Korea is really in the very serious situation regarding the Omicron. But in that case, North Korea should directly answer the suggestion of our government. But there's still no answer.
Thank you. We have around 5 minutes left, and I'd like to ask our speakers to discuss a little bit more about Japan, Korea-Japan relations. We didn't discuss that much today. So first, what would be President Yoon's immediate diplomatic and economic agenda with Japan, and what would be President Biden's, approach to the South Korea's agenda? That's my big question for our speakers. I think we can do that in 5 minutes, although it's a really important and complicated issues. Tammy?
Let me suggest, I think President Yoon will offer an idea to create a blue ribbon commission of leading experts from Korea and Japan to look closely at this historical issues. I think President Biden will urge Prime Minister Kishida to accept this very generous and thoughtful idea, but to buy time. And I think all three governments want to see improved relations. So I'm actually very optimistic about this.
Okay. Any pessimistic view? Yes, you're muted.
The one thing that I mentioned before, and I would say again, is that I do think the Japanese government may wait until after the July elections before it undertakes any kind of major diplomatic initiative with South Korea. But I do think that Yoon is going to be very persistent about seeking to improve ties with Japan. And I think in terms of the US, it will put Yoon at something of an advantage, because I think when you have a more progressive administration like Moon Jae-in, and I actually was very much supportive of Moon Jae-in and a fan of his diplomacy in a lot of ways. But I do think that what happens is that when South Korea is critical of Japan and there's frictions and you have a progressive South Korean government, then people in the US policy establishment tend to blame South Korea. But I think with what Yoon is doing, where he's saying, we want good relations, it's plain, it's simple, we're willing to meet with Japan, and he sort of has a fresh start, it's going to be very difficult for people in the US policy establishment to say, well, it's South Korea's fault.
Thank you, Greg. And Hung-gyu?
I am a little bit pessimistic because Japanese strategic vision is quite different from the past. And the major threat to Japan was from the northern part. The South Korea was very important as a buffer zone. But these days, Japanese strategic vision goes to the Indo-Pacific and also try to reduce the strategic importance of South Korea. And so Japan very strongly sent a kind of warning to the United States, don't intervene the bilateral relationship between Japan and South Korea. That was the message in last year, I guess, November meeting of Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. So even though Moon Jae-in government and then also Yoon Suk-yeol government tried to improve the relationship with Japan, and then actually they tried several times and in various ways, but Japan didn't, answer to respond to the positively, affirmatively. So still, it's too early to be positive in the improving relationship between these two. So it's a little bit a longer way, maybe roundabout way we need to think about. But still, the role of Biden must be very important. So this visit of Biden to South Korea and Japan are also very important. That's why we are carefully watching over what he's doing and what he's going to suggest.
Thank you, Hung-gyu. We have 1 minute left. Is there anybody who wants to make the last speech.
Maybe if I could clarify one point, I did not mean to be provocative with my statement about the Netflix law. I do not think that the presidents will drill down that deep for this discussion, but I was pointing it out because of the suggestion that a digital agreement between South Korea and the U.S. From my view, would be a wonderful thing and a very natural next step, but that these potential laws are standing a roadblock. So I just wanted that clarification.
Thank you, Tammy. It's amazing that, oh, Sunju, you have one last comment, yeah, please.
Actually, the raising the Netflix law is not really offending or provocative, not at all. I mean, I've been aware of the problems with the Korea's the laws regarding the internet, and then the privacy protection, and like the digital Netflix laws like that. And it is also quite the perplexing to the high level policy makers that the Korean society in general has very protective attitude toward the information and the information and this and then digital arena. So I think the Europeans also will have problems with South Korea's the laws related with the internet and the digital arena. So it is quite understandable that the United States will raise the issues with the Netflix law one way or another, or sooner or later. But at this point, this summit is too early, taking place too early. So the Yoon Suk-yeol government is not prepared for any specific issues that United States will raise. So, and I think that it will be useful for the Biden administration to lower expectations a little bit, because it is too early. So I think President Yoon also will try to manage the expectations in South Korea too. So I think it is both ways. For it runs both ways to manage the expectations and then focus on the bigger pictures or the bigger issues that guide the bilateral relations into higher or deeper cooperations. But at this point, the raising specific issues as the leverage to go to the next the level of relations, I don't think that is useful for both sides. That's I will say to this summit. Yes.
Thank you, Sunju. It's amazing that we covered from North Korea, Ukraine, China, and Netflix. I wouldn't expect we would discuss Netflix on our webinar like 2 years ago, but I think that this shows how wide range of issues we covered today. And thank you very much for sharing your insightful comments today. With that, I'd like to conclude today's webinar and thank you all, the distinguished speakers who joined us today, especially our Korean speakers for staying up late at night for us. And I'd like to also thank our GWIX team for putting this together. And of course, thank you all for joining us. With that, let me conclude today's webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.